Leftists, of course, love to cry about separation of church and state whenever Republicans actually advocate for legislating any form of Christian morality. And of course, they've fought for decades to totally eradicate the influence of Christianity in every aspect of society, all while working to establish their own form of secular, atheistic, self-worship, globalist humanism, all of the above at literally every turn. And of course, their opposition to the church is only contingent upon these Christian churches being actually Christian, opposing abortion, homosexuality, transgenderism, upholding family values, prayer, morality. Like, these are the instances when these like leftists actually shriek and cry out, whereas you have other iterations of Christianity that supposedly are able to get a pass, which you can understand why. But when churches fall away from the truth and the core tenets of the actual faith, instead of embracing these like false gods of social justice, liberalism, the pride of the mainstream, sort of like modernist popularity, like the left is, of course, more than happy to make use of such false doctrines in very opportunistic manners. So when they can twist and pervert scripture to support their goals, they gleefully become, the very kind of Bible thumpers that they accuse their conservative parents of having been throughout their very traumatic childhoods, where they had to get up and go to church on Sunday. And the ultimate goal of this action, like mechanically, is, of course, the mass importation of the third world, given that importation is what enables them to do literally everything that they do and maintain their power. That is the biggest issue that we face. And it's not just like naturally occurring, just like this thing that happens. Like, these people are not organizing themselves. And so that's the question. Who is herding the cattle? Who is shepherding the cattle? Who is facilitating these waves of migration? It is a matter of fact that the left did not win any of the arguments that have resulted in our country becoming so insane and so unrecognizable even to its older generations. Like, they simply imported tens of millions of people who will vote for them literally no matter what, which means the Democrats no longer have to appeal to the sensibilities of normal white American Christians. They are free to become completely insane and trust that their voter base will just go along with it. And there's a troubling trend that has become increasingly clear ever since President Trump's triumphant 2024 victory and subsequent crackdown on mass immigration in the United States, where you've got Christian church leadership just spanning any denomination, any denomination of your choosing throughout the country, where they are now like decrying the enforcement of established law and decrying the prioritization of national sovereignty. So after ignoring the complete moral decay of society, the promotion of Satanism, overt persecution of Christians during the Biden administration and long before, now the church has conveniently reemerged to fight alongside these very same people in defense of criminal aliens who have flooded the country and allowed for the poisoning of our society. So obviously the Bible is clear about welcoming, the immigrants. So in some interpretations, and the United States has, of course, welcomed certain types of immigrants, again, in some interpretations of the word immigrant, to a greater degree than perhaps any other country in history. The Christian faith is also pretty clear about emphasizing things like order, law, systems, sovereignty. Like, these attributes are conveniently ignored, of course, whenever this conversation arises, and there's more focus on just being like freaking wholesome chungus, kumbaya, welcoming or whatever. And the historic church has never fought for such leniency, by the way, towards criminal invaders as they are right now. And so that begs the question, okay, why? Why is the biggest concern among American churches right now the plight of the immigrant, right? Not just the immigrant, like the criminal alien, the drug dealer, the Islamic jihadist, he who has defined himself by opposition to our civilization, to Christianity for 1,400 years, the literal child abuser. Why does it seem that pastors across the country will shout from the pulpit that Americans are not allowed to have a country? And, you see the same thing in Europe, which we'll discuss, but never anywhere else. And the answer lies in the fact that over the past several decades, our government has been engaged in a violation of the separation of church and state, the likes of which has never been seen before. And when I say that, I mean an actual violation, not just liberals spurging out about when we make, doing evil things illegal, or praying in school, or praying before a football team at school. I'm talking about the church influencing government. Of course, fine, that's supposed to happen. That was actually the whole point. That should be encouraged to the fullest extent possible. But what has been happening instead is the government influencing churches, monetarily pushing them to change doctrine and teach in ways that they never would independently of that influence. So we will discuss all of this and much more. Do stay tuned. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the John Doyle Show. I know that sometimes these things are difficult because a lot of us are listening to podcasts in audio, which you should go do, by the way, Apple, Spotify, etc. So we don't understand what words are actually being used if the sound sounds the same. But when we say you need to get your T levels checked, what we are actually referring to is some of these contaminants that you see in these foreign teas, such as Chinese tea, for example, which has flooded America with products contaminated by microplastics, heavy metals. They don't care about your health. They care about your wallet and then your anti-health because they want to kill you. Kindred Harvest is the American answer. It's third-party lab tested, zero microplastics, zero heavy metals, blended and packed right here in the USA with 100% biodegradable, heat-sealed containers, no glue, no ink, and no compromises, all of which I'm told are good. So if you need your morning energy, your evening, relaxation, it's clean tea. It's for your entire family. Stop trusting China with your family's health. They are bad. Choose American quality instead. Break out of the longhouse. Choose Kindred Harvest. Cultivate goodness daily. That is what we are all about. Go to kindredharvest.com. Use code Doyle for 20% off. That's kindredharvest.com. Use code Doyle for 20% off. They sent me a whole care package. It's excellent. Something for the whole family. We enjoyed over Thanksgiving. Let's wind the clocks back, kind of like we did when we talked about Thanksgiving. So you've got New Year's Day, 1802. President Thomas Jefferson is writing a response to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut, who have contacted him with their concerns over the state constitution's perhaps lacking of protections for religious freedom. So Jefferson responds and he says something to the effect of, quote, "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature would make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." These words would end up causing some problems, which you may know, seeing as liberals have spent generations now quoting the last 5 words of Jefferson's sentence to do things like ban prayer in schools, remove displays of the 10 Commandments outside of courthouses, just like this very sinister tactic of appealing to American Christians in language that they understand, like, hey, you don't hate your country, right? Well, Thomas Jefferson, he didn't hate your country, right? I mean, it's Thomas Jefferson, right? Well, guess what he had to say? He said, you have to let me remove Christian influence from your society. Darn, I hate when that happens, but I guess we have to, right? Like, just like manipulating language to gaslight American Christians into inviting you into their homes, you vampire, and then, of course, you just take advantage of them and ruin everything. And you see this here. You saw this with the civil rights movement, as we've discussed. You see this now with mass migration, as we will discuss. So yeah, they're just lying, of course. Like, the whole idea there from Jefferson, which, by the way, is a letter. It's not a founding document. It is essentially, like, irrelevant. We have the founding documents. We know what they say. This letter, however, is invoked because it's a way of providing helpful context, which is to say, subverting the meaning of those documents, pretending we don't all know what the founders intended until literally 5 minutes ago. Like, oh, hey, this letter, that's kind of crazy, right? Wow, I guess we have to just, like, obey this and it supersedes everything else, right? That's crazy. Like, I don't know. Maybe the point of the clarification from Jefferson was to say, like, hey, the government shouldn't dictate what churches preach. The government shouldn't buy their silence with 30 pieces of silver. Like, okay, so true. But now in 2025, curiously, we have billions of tax dollars being sent to aligned organizations, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Services, HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, basically just like this army of, supposed faith-based resettlement organizations, right? Because why wouldn't they be resettlement organizations? Why wouldn't they be just another thing facilitating this transfer of wealth from American families into the pockets of people who by trade facilitate their displacement, their dispossession, the mass importation of people, hundreds of thousands of military-aged males from every Christ-hating hellhole on the planet right into your hometown, and then constructing the system such that now you've got all of these faith leaders, you've got all of these priests, all telling you, you actually have to smile and thank these people for invading your home, for enriching it, for teaching you what really matters, the little things, right? And of course, we've seen the results of this, whether it's in major cities or small town America. Remember the Haitians in Ohio? So, yeah, this is not exactly charity. I don't care if you use the word charity. It doesn't, like, disarm. I'm not, like, intimidated by that. We all know what words mean. We're allowed to identify when labels are not quite squaring with the definitions of those words. Like, no, this is just like bribery. This is our government essentially downloading its state religion, which is the worship of minorities, racial, ethnic, sexual, all of it, the worship of displacing white Christians. It's just downloading that program into every major Christian denomination in America and just like running the program, right? Paying for its execution, paying for financial incentives, providing social incentives to those who play ball. You get a media presence, you get a book tour, you get a career, you get to lead an NGO, whatever it may be. So as long as you find a way to explain our religion, the state religion, in terms that are familiar to your religion, so long as your sermon is to the effect of, hey, invite the world. Well, can we say it's for Christ, even though the people we're inviting will immediately just ally themselves with a political project that seeks to completely destroy American civilization and Christianity just because they might get some more money out of it? Yeah, sure, like fine, run it, like whatever you have to say it. So this is my point. We hear so much from these people about the separation of church and state, whatever. It's just more gaslighting. That wall that Jefferson alludes to will be happily conditionally demolished by these people and buried under just pallets of cash. And the corrupt are willing to take money off those pallets and just run with it. Take the money from a not very well-meaning government, which itself was taking the money from pockets of well-meaning American Christians, and ultimately that is just going to be used to intentionally harm those very people, those American Christians. So yeah, it likes this behavior. It incentivizes this behavior. It will enable churches to exist without conflict insofar as they do specifically this. And since it's a matter of historical fact that European civilization has been one of the greatest forces for Christ, it's no wonder that they want to destroy it, right? Which was not the foundation of our country in the first place. So back to that subversion, it's been around since the 1960s. All roads lead back to the 1960s, right? They've been shrieking about this separation of church and freaking state literally every time a football coach leads his team in prayer before a game, or a kid wants to read his Bible during a lunch break. They claim that this is in the Constitution, and Jefferson wanted to erase God from public life. Neither of these things are true. Read what Jefferson actually said in 1802. It is extremely available. His letter was meant to assure the Danbury Baptists that the new U.S. government would never do what the Virginia Anglicans once did, which is tax them, throw preachers in prison, make them swear fealty to a state church. Jefferson calls the First Amendment a wall of separation, saying that the government shall reach actions only, not opinions. In other words, the state can punish crimes, but not thoughts, not faith, not the pulpit. So whatever this wall was, it was built to protect the church from the state. Not the state from the church, not the other way around. Moreover, the idea that they would have even reviewed other religions as equal to Christianity, even encompassed by the word religion or faith, that is kind of absurd. Jefferson, better than maybe anyone, would know this. This entire category of thought for the founding fathers was intended to get European Christians to just chill out on each other and not kill each other in the New World as they've been doing in Europe forever. They never would have extended this language to the madness and schizophrenia of the uncivilized world and what they choose to call God. But it's also not true that Christian influence was ever barred from American society the way, the founding fathers intended. If you don't believe me, look at how the early states operated. Massachusetts had an official state church until 1833. Congress would hire chaplains to open sessions with prayers. Blasphemy laws remained on the books in most places until well into the 19th century. Sodomy was a crime everywhere because Christian morality was the law. In fact, when Jefferson, the most liberal of the founding fathers, arguably, when he was the governor of Virginia, he literally changed the law to equate sodomy with rape. Do with that what you will. And nobody saw this as violating, the wall or whatever, because it was one direction. It was keeping government out of religion. It's hands off religion, not religion's hands off government. In fact, the only way the government was designed to function properly is precisely if religion's hands were on it, which again is specifically in reference to Christianity. They write about a moral people. How do you think they're defining moral people? They never thought that they would actually have to spell it out for you. It was referencing Christianity, obviously. But then, of course, after the Second World War, everything just, what are you going to do? You have, Everson versus the Board of Education in 1947, which is, I think, the first kind of the modern era Supreme Court ruling or whatever relating to a separation of church and state. And the Supreme Court cited this letter from Jefferson as a justification for their decision, which essentially turned the wall into more of a check valve, right? Like a one-way street. So on the one hand, Christianity was to be stricken from public life, but simultaneously, the state was more than happy to march right in to the church and just a big burlap sack of cash, with contract work for its bidding, which again means just total war on our civilization. That's why the same freaks who scream ad nauseum about having to see the freaking 10 Commandments in public, curiously, they're very silent when the state is quite willing to fork over $2 billion to Catholic charities as part of the Open Borders Project. And look, people will be like, well, why are you only talking about freaking Catholics? Because I'm Catholic. I see problems that need to be corrected in my house. And we're talking about more than just Catholics, by the way. It's other Christian denominations and organizations. It's Jewish ones. But this does flare up commonly among Catholics for reasons that I think I understand fairly well, and which we will get into more in a second. And I know that I don't like throw my hat in the ring typically with this kind of stuff. I find this kind of like online debates, this like eternal debate about Christian denominations online. I feel like it's more of a vanity project than it is like a sincere, productive discussion in most cases. So usually I sit that one out. But yeah, when we've got like Catholic bishops suing the Trump administration for halting the funding meant for refugee resettlements, we've got all this other stuff going on. Like, we need to address it because there are certainly, as they say, calls coming from inside the house. And that's one of the reasons, the whole like America must submit to Rome. Those types don't really like me because it's like, okay, dude, if organized Catholicism suddenly like ran the country, like we just snap our fingers and whatever Catholic infrastructure and institutions exist are now suddenly running the country. Like, is that not going to just be total libtardism, except with occasional emphasis on social issues? Like, these people are totally fine presently with mass immigration, totally fine with redistribution of wealth, but then they won't like chop your kid's pee-pee off. So that's some kind of improvement over whatever we're doing now. I disagree. Yeah, I'm not willing to settle there. I'm not willing to take that deal. I think that we can make things better than that, actually. But yeah, it's really easy to just like throw out that America's corrupt. America deserves to fall. America must submit to Rome. It's really easy to do that when you're making like social media content. It's tougher to outline actual solutions that affect people's families and their immediate quality of life. But anyway, I want to play some clips for you guys to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here.
Some Catholics in Europe believe that Islam is a threat to a Christian identity of the West. Are they right? And what would you say to them?
All of the conversations that I had during my time both in Turkey and in Lebanon, including with many Muslims, were precisely concentrated on the topic of peace and respect for people of different religions. I know that, as a matter of fact, that has not always been the case. I know that in Europe there are many times fears that are present but oftentimes generated by people who are against immigration and trying to keep out people who may be from another country, another religion, another race. And in that sense, I would say that we all need to work together. One of the values of this trip is precisely to raise the world's attention to the possibility that dialogue and friendship between Muslims and Christians is possible. I think one of the great lessons that Lebanon can teach to the world is precisely showing a land where Islam, Christianity are both present and are respected, and that there is a possibility to live together, to be friends. Stories, testimony, witnesses that we heard even in the past 2 days of people helping each other, Christians with Muslims, both of whom had their villages destroyed, for example, of saying we can come together and work together. I think those are lessons that would be important also that we heard in Europe or North America, that we should perhaps be a little less fearful and look for ways of promoting authentic dialogue.
And we are disturbed when we see among our people a climate of fear and anxiety around questions of profiling and immigration enforcement.
We are saddened by the state of contemporary debate and the vilification of immigrants. We are concerned about the conditions in detention centers and the lack of access to pastoral care.
We lament that some immigrants in the United States have arbitrarily lost their legal status. We are troubled by threats against the sanctity of houses of worship and the special nature of hospitals and schools.
We are grieved when we meet parents who fear being detained when taking their children to school, or when we try to console family members who have already been separated from their loved ones.
Despite obstacles and prejudices, generations of immigrants have made enormous contributions to the well-being of our nation. We as Catholic bishops love our country and pray for its peace and prosperity.
For this very reason, we feel compelled now in this environment to raise our voices
in defense of God-given human dignity.
Catholic teaching exhorts nations to recognize the fundamental dignity of all persons, including immigrants. We bishops advocate for a meaningful reform of our nation's immigration laws and procedures.
Yeah, man, it's pretty bleak out there. This isn't rage baiting. This isn't cherry picking. You can go check out the Sunday Bulletin in half of America's parishes if you want to see the same. Like, the front page is a collection for migrant aid. The back page typically has nothing on abortion, but sometimes it does. But it never has anything about the transgender grooming of children, about the fentanyl flooding in from south of the border, killing literally cities of Americans every year. The only sin the modern hierarchy seems to recognize is America having a border is bad. That is bad. That is not good. Catholic Charities is the second largest charity in America, second only to the Red Cross. They've received over $2 billion in government grants between 2021 and 2025, which, if you recall, was when the Biden administration had thrown open the borders and allowed people to just flood in from the third world. And in 2023 alone, the Bishop's Migration and Refugee Services took in like $134 million in taxpayer money, which is like all but 5% of their operating budget. So this is what they would tend to exist for. That's a contract. That is contract work. That's not a charitable donation. And the fine print reads as such. It says, fly in the invaders, settle them, ideally in red states, keep preaching open borders until people think it's the new gospel. Weaponize the beautiful hearts of American Christians, right? Weaponize those beautiful hearts against them. And they aren't even bothering to hide it. Catholic Charities operates the largest migrant shelter network on the Mexican border. They link up with migrant caravans as they make their way north. They give them maps. They give them bus tickets, lawyers. When ICE comes knocking, priests will hide illegals in rectories. They literally brag about doing this. In Los Angeles, priests tell churchgoers it's their Christian duty to impede ICE raids. We have to hear so much about child abuse in the church when it's meant to harm the standing of Christianity in society. By the way, that's not even real. Like, it's less frequent than it occurs in public schools by far. It's not even close. But okay, suddenly now we have to stop hearing about child abuse when people are trying to use Christianity as an excuse to import populations that literally traffic children every day in this country, in every major city. Not talking about like some James Bond villain secret island. Like, no, in buildings that you drive by every day, there is abuse occurring because of these people. But curiously, insofar as these people run cover for that, language of acceptance, shaming people for not welcoming these immigrants, literally sheltering illegal aliens from law enforcement, now all of a sudden, we don't have a problem with child abuse. All of a sudden, that's okay. It's a consistent vector. It's not inconsistent. You just don't understand. Both cases are meant to harm white Christian America. You lie about child abuse in the church, and you lie about the church to facilitate the mass importation of the third world. It squares perfectly, actually. Both of these things are driven by the same intent. They achieve the same purpose. So, yeah, this isn't the church of Augustine or Aquinas. After 1965, something went terribly wrong. There's language in Vatican II that essentially opened the door to this like universal fraternity. Of course, Hart-Celler was right there to open up the literal doors to the third world. Federal government, of course, strolls right in, puts up the money to make it all work, to make the machine function. This is bad. This is not good. This has to stop. And I, by the way, frequently have been attacked by Catholics, even conservative Catholics, quite viciously at times, for my stance on immigration. A lot of Catholics do believe that immigration policy is pointless because we're all the same. We're all children of God. Borders don't matter. We should all be submitting to Rome, stuff like that. Also, America's doomed to fail because our founding was revolutionary and liberal. I think these ideas are false. I think that they're modern perversions. Remember, at the time of the American Revolution, it was the based anti-revolutionaries, the based conservatives who went up to Canada. Look how Canada's doing. Have they kept it together longer than revolutionary, doomed to fail America? How's that going? We can perhaps dedicate an entire day to those ideas later. But the point is that this sentiment is common among Catholics. I'm not denying that. Believe me, I am very aware of it. They show up to my speeches and they yell at me about it. So it's not surprising that these kinds of things are able to happen, while wearing this sort of like protective label of Catholicism or Christianity. But the other side of that is that it's very difficult for me to sit and listen and be told, sitting as one white American in a sea of other white Americans, and be told by a guy, a faith leader, speaking broken English, that we must be accepting and welcoming to all migrants. It's interesting, isn't it? How so many people can claim to believe the same thing. They choose the same label to identify, but then their editorial standard is different, right? so to speak, the editorial standard, what they choose to emphasize, what they choose to focus on, talk about. How can that be so different if we all wear the same label, right? It's curious to me how so many priests who aren't themselves from America seem to believe the most important thing they can discuss every Sunday is why white Americans must do the godly thing by opening up the border to tens of millions of people who don't like them, we'll say. Or even just this emphasis on like helping the poor. You hear that all the time. And of course, we should be sympathetic to the poor. Of course, we should help the poor. Charity is good. Nobody is denying that. But how often do we hear about the vice of envy? How it's wrong to be resentful. How it's wrong to view what others have as somehow unjust and be angry about that. Quite frankly, the answer is much less often. I've been to services all over the country. One time I had a priest tell me that trying to go to Mars while we still have poor people is actually worldly. And it's like, okay, dude, it's Mars. It's like literally not worldly, but I get the point. However, we have to discuss then what is causing that poverty. Why do we even have poverty? Are we ever allowed to state the fact that people are taking advantage of the actions caused by these sentiments? This idea that we just have to indiscriminately throw help at people and that taking advantage of that charity is wrong? Apparently not. The message seems to be that we just keep like pouring money on the richest and most comfortable poor people in human history, and doing otherwise is somehow bad. So I don't know, man. That's why when you find a good church, like you stay there, you support it, because we have a lot of problems, right? And we know the rot is deep, and we know that, it seems to be the case nowadays that churches care more about letting in unlimited Muslims than they do winning the souls of their neighbors, and actually even questioning the integrity and the piety of those souls if they are in opposition to the flooding of those Muslims into their backyards. We should be converting our fellow Americans, not telling them that they're racist for wanting to have a country. Where's that in the Bible? I know I'm Catholic, so I wouldn't know, but like you get the point, right? And I wish this was only a Catholic problem, by the way, but it's not. It is to some extent. But again, the same pipeline of federal open borders money is pouring into every major Christian denomination in America. Here's an example. The same year that Catholic Charities took $134 million from the federal government, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service got $120 million in grants, which is 87% of their budget. Another mainline Protestant charity, Church World Service, they get 73% of their money from evil Uncle Sam, as opposed to good Uncle Sam, who is tied up somewhere. We must find him and get him out of there. Even Orthodox denominations, they have their snouts buried in the public trough. You've got international Orthodox Christian charities getting millions of dollars to resettle Ukrainians and Afghans with no mention of Christian suffering just the world over. Jewish charities too, like we mentioned, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and they barely even resettle Jews anymore. They ran out. 99% of their clients are Muslim. 90% of their budget is just taxpayer cash. It's on the website. It's all there. It's all of them. Islamic Relief USA, every other faith-based charity, they all pull the same scam, dude. It's federal money being used to import third worlders who hate America, who hate our way of life. And it's not surprising to me at all that non-Christian charities are doing this. It is, however, quite shocking that Christian charities and Christian organizations are paying for the rope that is going to be used to hang us. And then we look at the people actually running the charities, and a great many of these Christian resettlement agencies are run by people who have never seen the inside of a church or would perhaps prefer to go to a different house of worship on Saturday. The CEO of one of these Protestant organizations literally celebrates Ramadan on Twitter, but says nothing about Easter, the most important Christian holiday. Another has a board just brimming with ex-ADL, ex-SPLC staffers. The money may be Christian in the sense that it's coming from Christians, but the mission is certainly not. What a great summary of the post-war American government, right? Just a big wealth transfer between white American Christians and people who really do not like white American Christians, right? The government collects the money, it takes some for itself, it takes some for its friends, and then it just contracts all the work out to displace these white American Christians. It's like the old arguments against the planned economy. The government doesn't create anything, it just contracts the work out. Yeah, so true. And when the government wants to create the displacement and dispossession of normal white American patriots, it too can't even do that. It must contract it out. And everybody wins, everybody gets paid. The only losers are us, right? The WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Papists, right? 2 Ps and WASP. Don't kill me. But yeah, so out of the 10 official State Department refugee resettlement contractors, 7 of these 10 are officially faith-based, and they've cumulatively taken something like $9 billion in federal grants since the advent of the Obama administration. It's your money, dude. That's your money turned over to Christian agencies that have turned churches into like conveyor belts for what the media calls the Great Replacement, right? It's an abomination. I don't know what else you would call it. Almost every denomination, to some extent or another, has sold out America for the 30 pieces of silver, right? And there are ways to correct this, and we can do this by using what's already, we'll say, on the books. Like, we already know what we need to do. That's fine, and it's perfectly legal, perfectly cool. We know that the purpose of Jefferson's wall was to keep the state from influencing the church. But when the state starts handing the church a bunch of cash to do its bidding, well, now that wall is not exactly what it used to be, right? And that's precisely what happened. The federal government does not give money to Catholic Charities, Lutheran services, or even HIAS, the Jewish one, out of the goodness of their hearts. They have a particular charter in mind, which is simply resettle as many migrants as they can, lobby against enforcement, and then you turn a blind eye. You don't talk about when the crime occurs, when the welfare abuse occurs, the degradation of the society that results from the invasion, right? Should the bishop step out of line? Should the pastors step out of line? The faith leaders? All of a sudden, the money's cut off. This is quite literally what the Danbury Baptists feared would happen. It incentivizes evil behavior deliberately. It keeps people dependent upon the government teat in this sense. And then those people work to gatekeep anybody who would actually want to change it. So the federal government is by far the largest donor to organized Christianity in America, far outpacing what parishioners are putting in the collection basket every Sunday, right? When the government is underwriting 95% of your budget, guess what happens? You think that's a mistake? Do you think they don't know what they're doing? They're unaware of the consequences of that underwriting? Maybe they're just a coincidence. They're even an accident. Even look at the Catechism. Paragraph 2241 states that rich nations must welcome the foreigner, sure, but then it says to the extent that they are able. The U.S. has welcomed 50 million foreigners, likely much more since 1965, probably closer to 100 million. Now, I'm no more a theologian now than on the day I was confirmed. However, I would argue, I think we are way past the to the extent part. The status of the extent, has been reached, and probably a long time ago. And that same paragraph, by the way, states that governments, quote, may make the exercise of the right to immigrate subject to various juridical conditions, and immigrants must obey the laws and respect the traditions of the country that welcomes them in. That part is mysteriously absent from the USCCB press releases, isn't it? Instead, the bishops want to act as if border enforcement is somehow a mortal sin, and Catholics who would want deportation are schismatics. While liberals pretend to be concerned about, some possibility of the church taking control of the state religion has actually infiltrated churches. Jefferson stated in 1802 that the state would never dictate the faith. I think the state is very happy with its present arrangement, the present arrangement that it created. And I don't think all these people, by the way, are necessarily acting with bad intentions. A lot of them really do believe this stuff, and they all say the same thing, right? Like every open borders bishop has the same verses memorized. Leviticus 19:33, they say, well, you're supposed to be welcoming to the foreigner and all 75 million of his closest friends. And so they scream this at you as though it means just dissolve the border and turn Texas into Mexico, even more. And of course, that's not the case, but they do this with, Numbers 15. There's no shortage. There is no shortage of verses to be cherry-picked, which ironically is supposed to be a very not Catholic thing to do. But when you actually read the Bible, it's very clear. You are to assimilate or you are to be cast out. They don't assimilate, so they are cast out. Problem solved. Clear as day. You've even got bishops who claim that Jesus married Joseph and the wee donkey. They were refugees. No, they were legal residents who returned to Bethlehem to be registered in a Roman census. They didn't jump a wall. They didn't overstay visas. No parallel whatsoever to 30 guys from Pakistan claiming asylum because one of their cousins caught them being gay with each other. That's just not how it works. There are even verses in John where Jesus essentially calls illegal entry a form of theft. He compares them to thieves and robbers. Not exactly sympathetic to, again, millions of military-aged males flooding the border to collect free stuff taken out of the households of Christian Americans. We can easily play this game, right? And if we play it, we win. They're being dishonest. And we're supposed to tell the truth. Jesus was not a hippie. Firm lines were drawn in the sand. That's the whole point. But the point of all of this is that, yes, there are real problems in our communities, and we can actually solve them. That's the good news. We know how to solve them. They did not exist in previous generations. So do not despair. It actually gets us nowhere. It actually gets us further back than where we are now. You don't want to abandon the table just because Judas is there too, right? We can survive this just fine. The Bible's very clear that nations have both the right and the duty to secure their borders, and that immigrants have a duty insofar as they exist in the host country to obey the laws of that host country. No grant from the federal government can change that. No faith leader with a freaking book deal and a freaking private jet can erase what the Bible says. So do something about it. Like, as a Catholic or a Christian, you ostensibly have avenues of obtaining power within your church that could stop this from happening, that could slow this down, reverse course. Tell me how it's a better use of your time to just stay on the internet spurging out. It's always easy to convince ourselves of that. I understand, but I'm just saying, start with your parish, start with your church. The average, diocese committee is run by some 70-year-old liberal boomer who thinks the point of the faith is freaking love and freaking acceptance, man. So yeah, show up, make your voice heard, make them know that they're not in the majority. Volunteer for finance boards. Do what you're going to do. Ask why the bulletins are obsessed with migrants, but say nothing about issues that are actually harming your community, American communities, America as a country. Ask why the collection plate is being used to resettle Afghans, but not to build community centers, churches, in places in America that desperately need them. Ask loud, be disruptive, be respectful, obviously, but be disruptive. Topple the tables, if you will, because nobody else is going to do it. The future is not going to be pride flags, open borders, NGOs. The future is literally you. Yes, you specifically. You specifically right now listening to this. You are allowed to have God, family, and country. You don't have to settle. You don't have to take a deal. You don't have to negotiate. You don't have to pick your favorite two or even just your favorite. You get to have it all. And we know that because we used to. So yeah, don't waste your time. Don't get comfortable with yourself by not acting because you're telling yourself that the real freaking solution that we have to pursue is some extremely esoteric, elaborate thing I found on the internet. Brother, we know the problems. They are staring us right in the face. Our enemies celebrate them. Let's just stay over the target, right? Let's actually focus on what seems to threaten them. Let's stay, let's fight, and let's actually win, because without Christ and without our civilization, we will have literally nothing. I just want to pause for a moment and thank you for listening. Thank you for standing with the program. And the truth is that we only exist because people like you refuse to let fear silence the truth. And darkness never has the final word, right? Not in America, not with us, not when you fight. And this isn't about, me personally, even though it kind of is because you're listening to me. And it's not about specifically Blaze like the network. It is about this kind of coalition of people who believe in America as it's properly understood, right? That being something that is worth defending, worth healing. And so when you subscribe, you make sure that has a voice, that is represented on the national stage as opposed to sort of other editorial positions that are maintained by networks or people that we don't really like as much. So I would say vote with your dollar, right? Go join up with us, stand shoulder to shoulder with me specifically and with patriots and with a community that knows that America is actually still worth fighting for. You are choosing courage over censorship. I mean, clearly we're allowed to say whatever we want, right? We've been having fun. We are enjoying. So choose that. Choose truth over fear, light over darkness. And you do that by joining at blazetv.com/Doyle. And you can get 20% off right now, or $20 off right now. So yeah, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can actually be a part of shaping the future, keeping the lights on. That is blazetv.com/Doyle, blazetv.com/Doyle. Thank you. We'll take a break and then go back to being insensitive to people who share different beliefs and backgrounds than we do. Okay, BRB. So the president made some interesting comments recently about the European demographic crisis and how these sort of new European ascendant demographics may possess certain hostilities towards the American way of life, and how this may call into question our allyship with these European countries as they would become naturally increasingly hostile to us. And I want to play this clip. I want to break it down because I agree with a lot of it, but believe it or not, I'm nuanced here. There are some things with which I would disagree. So take a look.
He's really gotten right is the immigration, because he allows nobody in his country. And Poland has done a very good job in that respect too. But most European nations, they're decaying. They're decaying.
You can imagine some leaders in Europe are a little freaked out by what your posture is, and European.
No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries.
Well, European Council
and
President.
they're people I like. Look, they're people I like. I get along with them. You know that. But they can't let this happen. And it gets to a point where you can't really correct it. There'll be a point, and it's very close to that point.
And what will that mean?
It will mean that they're no longer going to be strong nations.
Does that mean they won't be allies
or
anymore?
they'll be, well, it depends, you know, it depends. They'll change their ideology, obviously, because the people coming in have a totally different ideology. But it's going to make them much weaker. They'll be much weaker, and they'll be much different.
And what will that mean for our relationship
look at
with
your
them?
mayor of London. He's a disaster. He's a disaster. He's got a totally different ideology of what he's supposed to have. And he gets elected because so many people have come in and they vote for him now because, you know, it's like, it's one of those things. But I hate what's happened to London, and I hate what's happened to Paris. I hate when I see it.
You know, sir, it's sometimes hard to tell when you say these things. Do you intend to send kind of a message of tough love to our allies to push them to make reforms? Or do you think that many of them are just weak and you don't really want to be allies with them?
I think they're weak, but I also think that they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do.
All right, so the president is correct in some sense. You know, Europe doesn't know what to do. They're obviously very happy to facilitate their own displacement, as we in America are. I am going to first get the small thing out of the way, which is where I kind of disagree with the sentiment surrounding this, though I do generally agree with the points that the president's making. It's very popular right now on social media, as you may have seen, for people in general to cast stones across the Atlantic Ocean towards what's happening in Europe. You know, you can easily get very high engagement on social media by posting videos that are misrepresentative of certain cities in Europe by saying, you know, Europe is finished. London is finished. And you'll see all these people walking around in burqas, hijabs, whatever. And it's very easy to kind of like cast stones over at Europe because they're obviously facing a very similar problem to the problem that we are facing in the West, which is the mass importation of the third world, demographic displacement, things of that nature, right? However, these countries are still like 90%, you know, native to their founding stock. America at best is like 55%, maybe if you're being generous, probably closer to 50%. So if you're just going to like cast stones in terms of demographics, the American situation is much more dire. I'm not pessimistic. We've always been outnumbered throughout history. We've dealt with far more complicated issues than just like moving people. I'm not worried about that. I'm just saying it's demoralization, right? To like post these videos of European cities and be like, Europe is finished. Europe, again, I'm confident in the Europeans as I'm confident in the Americans. I'm maybe even a little bit more confident in certain European aspects. I think that America right now has a more viable political path. It's more, our avenues for solving our problems seem to be far more open, not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but foreseeable than maybe what's going on in Europe. And so I agree with it in that sense where it's like we can talk about this, we can put pressure on incumbent European governments to basically say like, look, this is going to make you weaker. You know this. We're going to solve our problem in America. Don't count on us to bail you out. It puts pressure on those incumbent governments to either get better, to become more effective on the immigration issue, or to become increasingly unpopular and perhaps provide some help for, you know, sort of allied right-wing political movements in Europe to ascend and to basically pick up, you know, the torch and solve those problems in Europe. So I don't like the discussion of this only because, not because anything that the president said was wrong, but because a lot of times it feeds into this idea of people being like, you know, haha, Europe is cooked, haha. And it's like, okay, we're all sort of in our own kind of brother war, not a war among brothers, but a war where we are brothers, we are allies against this like common threat that we are facing existentially against civilization, which is incompatible with our own. You know, it is very easy to post a video of Paris or London. How'd you get over there, big guy, to take that video? Did you go to an airport by chance? American airports are not exactly doing so well themselves. So, yeah, I think it's good leverage. I think it's good to put pressure, and I think it's good to make immigration the sort of central issue that the Western world, the Anglosphere, broadly speaking, is facing, as Trump has done here, as J.D. Vance has done in front of, you know, world leaders at these events. So that's all very good, but we can't allow that to be, you know, outrage porn, rage bait to demoralize, because demoralization does not exactly make people more effective. It tends to make them spurg out, confused, you know, defeatist, right? So we don't like that. But In any case, that'll about wrap it up for us here on the John Doyle Show. Be sure to go to Spotify, Apple, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Leave a 5-star review. Let us know your thoughts. And yeah, we have an exciting Advent season, don't we, ahead of us. We'll have some good content. We'll have a lot of exciting stuff going on, some good discussions. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. May God bless you. May God bless your family. And we'll see you shortly.